Hello and welcome to JavaScript Marathon training presented by This.Labs. My name is Sarah Renaud with This.Labs and I will be your host. Our next session is Getting Started with Eleventy. Today's trainer is Kyle Mitofsky, Senior Software Engineer at This.Inc. Welcome, Kyle.
Thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome. You can find Kyle on Twitter using the handle shown at the bottom of the screen. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or feedback. JavaScript Marathon would not be possible without our sponsors. Our sponsor today is This.Labs, your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at this.co. Do you find keeping up with the constantly evolving technologies a struggle? Do you want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies? This.Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. Contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. We have a lot of great upcoming events. Check out our global meetups. We have monthly meetups in Angular, GraphQL, React, and Vue. We also have a modern web meetup monthly as well. More details about these events are available at this.co. And finally, JavaScript Marathon will return Wednesday, December 5th. So stay tuned for more details. And with that, I will hand it off to Kyle.
Cool. Thank you so much, Sarah. All right. So today, I think what we get the chance to go over is introduction to Eleventy, what that is, kind of what problem it's solving, where that sits in the larger ecosystem. I will do my best to present topics on Eleventy. There are a lot of great people who work on this project. I'm not one of them, but I'm always in awe of the stuff that's coming out of this community and also static site generation in general. I don't have any slides for today. We're just going to hop right into the editor in a second, but just wanted to touch on some of the technologies that we'll go over. Mostly, we'll look at Eleventy itself as a static site generator, generate some stuff, write some code to help generate some stuff. Whenever we are building a website, we need some sort of templating language to build out HTML. Well, or you can just write HTML. This is the builder part helps us template. And Eleventy works with one great thing about Eleventy, if you scroll down, there is a huge documentation button, so you can't miss it. And so one of the things that's great about Eleventy is it works with, out of the box, a whole bunch of different templating languages. And the one we'll use just for today is Nunjux. If you're familiar with kind of a lot of template insertion or handlebars or the liquid template from Shopify, they're all kind of pretty similar. They're in a similar space. We'll get something deployed and shipped on Netlify because it just makes it so darn easy. Why not get it into production during a little live demo? Eleventy is built on top of Node. So if you're coming at web development from scratch, you'll need to download Node onto your computer. For most people who are kind of familiar in the space, that is a dependency they've probably already taken care of. But in case you haven't, no shade, grab that, and that's the only dependency you'll need to get stuff running locally, at least to start, and we'll deploy onto GitHub. Again, some often core tools in the web development game. There isn't a hard stop on GitHub. You can put on any source control provider. You don't even have to use source control, but I think our lives are better with it. And if we hop over into the very front page of Eleventy, there's a little quick start that I'll just try to leverage where in the documentation you can find this. This is all going to get recorded, so you can go back in case this goes by quickly. But I think it's helpful to take a look at the documentation. And if I scroll up in a second, the only documentation I know with a floating possum and a balloon, there's a backstory there that we won't get into right now, but that's great. You don't see any other documentation sites of that. Where I'm going to pop over is into an empty code directory. There's nothing in here, and I just have it open in Visual Studio Code. And that's all the prep work I've done for today. When you install Eleventy, you can install it locally onto your machine with npm install. And it's at its core a CLI, a command line interface. And so for Eleventy, for npm, whenever you use a command line interface, you have to install it with the global flag. And I think this, I often say, oh, I just want to install Eleventy. And I will just give everyone the warning that it is namespaced into the organizational name Eleventy, and then it's Eleventy in there. And so that is the install steps. This should happen relatively quickly on my machine since it's installed already. This allows you to run Eleventy commands in your terminal of choice. And so you can run it from there. With npx, you actually don't even need to install that locally if you don't want to. And it's your choice. This will, because it's a node project, we'll start with npm init, which will just kind of set up a package folder for us to put in dependencies. I won't care about filling out any of those fields, so I'll fill out yes to all of that so I don't get prompted. And we'll move through that. I'll also install Eleventy locally into this project, and that's going to help down the road when we move on to a CI/CD pipeline to highlight that we have a dependency on Eleventy. So whereas previously I installed that, I'm also going to install it. I think with the latest versions of Node, you don't need save anymore, but as long as you have a package.json already, but I will create a package.json. This isn't the fastest. You can start Eleventy without all of these things, but we're just kind of moving through the steps to get everything built up. And while we're doing all of our setup stuff, let's just do some boilerplate stuff when we start a project. We know we want it to be, clear out of here. We know we want it to be a Git repository, so I'm going to run git init, which will initialize this as a Git repository. And then all the stuff for Node that we don't want to include. There's an npx command for git ignore that you can pull in whatever type of template you want, and it will bring you a git ignore. And that should, as soon as that kind of gets processed, that should gray out. Node modules, that shouldn't be considered as part of that. We'll take a look at that once we get into committing anything. So fundamentally, what Eleventy is trying to do is take content in whatever way that you have content and build that into a site. Content can consist of a lot of different file types. Markdown is considered content. HTML is considered content. Any of the templating languages that we talked about, Nunjux, for example, is considered content. So at its simplest, and one advantage to just, one thing that's nice is authoring content in Markdown. There are different ways that you can kind of manage Markdown like content in a CMS. That's outside the scope for kind of getting started. But Markdown just makes for a nice content management experience. So let's create a new file called index.markdown. We don't need the terminal at the moment. And this we can put in a title, hello JS Marathon. Markdown, I'll kind of assume some degree of familiarity with Markdown for this audience. But if you're not familiar, there's some sites like Learn Markdown in 5 minutes, help you get started. But we can put in some basic markup tags, so we could have some bold text in here. And we won't focus too much on have some bold text. We won't focus too much on how to actually author any of that. But let's run the Eleventy build command and actually produce some output here. And so the build command on Eleventy, now that we have it installed as a global CLI, it's just available by running Eleventy from your terminal of choice. And if we run that, we should get some output. It says, hey, we wrote one file from this file, and here's where that file got located. So that goes into our built site directory. And so where the thing that will ship when we build this static site generator is everything inside of site is what's the shippable bits of it. Typically, that's not going to be something that you commit into your project. So just in the process of completeness, let's take site and put it as part of the git ignore. And that nicely also kicked out node modules and site from the rest of our build. Great. So at this point, we don't have much of something, but I want to kind of start getting some pipeline set up. And so the final things we'll do, just as boilerplate setup, is there's a GitHub CLI. Whoops. And if we spell it correctly, we can run hub create. We can commit our existing changes. I think we ran git init onto here. Reinitialize git repository. I don't see any changes. Maybe hub create automatically commits them. Let's push those changes up and just run whatever command it tells us to. Source. Oh my. Well, maybe I'll just work on some local stuff. Debugging is not something we should be spending much time on here. And I think we can do this without anything on this end. If somebody sees it in the comments, feel free to leave me a comment and we can double back to it. And otherwise, we'll just work locally. No big deal from there. Kyle Dye has a comment, and let me read that. This might be premature, but are there pre-commit tools that will help solidify the source code, i.e. detect markdown formatting? Yes, in the ecosystem at large. I don't think anything that is specific to Eleventy. So yeah, you can put some stuff on Eleventy. Eleventy does have this concept of linters, and it will audit your site and give you some warnings. I think Zach Leatherman himself has put in some for like a simple words linter and say, in your content, don't include words like, you just have to do this, or this should be easy. And so some of those have been built. I don't know if they'll automatically correct any of that language rather than just call it out. But certainly there's some tools. I don't think anything specific to Eleventy. Punji says, no remote. Yeah, but this is what's supposed to set up that remote. And usually I just put it in there. And we could run git config, see what's going on. Yeah, this should be the remote here. I don't want to pause too long on it. But that's what you get for running live code over the demo. Punji, if you have any other suggestions, we can run them after the fact. Otherwise, we'll just run locally. I don't think anything of import will be missed. All right, so why I wanted to deploy it is to be able to say, hey, let's actually host this site. Let's see what's happening. And Eleventy gives us a way to do that with the Eleventy command. If we pass in serve, what it will do is perform a build step, serve up just a simple HTTP server. Actually, no, not a simple. It will use a browser sync. There's some kind of interesting stuff going on behind the scenes there to keep it aligned. And then it will also put a watch on any files that aren't part of your git ignore. And if those change, then it will rebuild the site and then redeploy it. So let's run Eleventy serve. It'll start off with a build, and then we can launch localhost 800 and we'll get this site. Okay, let's make, and I'll zoom this in. Let's make some modifications to this. Let's kind of keep down the line of fleshing this out. Let's kind of go for kind of at least to start like a little 3-page marketing site. 3-page brochure site has like an index page, maybe a personal site of yours. Anything that could be a site we can probably build with Eleventy, especially if it's content based, is where static site generators in general really thrive. And down the road, kind of in the 201 course, we can get dynamic content in here. We can call APIs during our build step, but let's kind of keep fleshing out this. So let's have an about.markdown and maybe a contact.markdown. And I'm just going to give these a quick little title, contact us at whatever. For about, I'm going to say, here's a title for the page about us, and here's some more info. All right, when we save all that, Eleventy works with clean URLs by default. And what I mean by that is index came just right at the domain root, because most of the time the index.html file will be served as soon as you are serving up a particular folder. It's called the default document. If we navigate to the contact folder, it's just an index.html file that's inside of contact. And that's the file that's getting served. And so if we go back to our browser and we just move to contact, we should see the contact markdown that's been generated into HTML. If we wanted, we can use other templating languages. If we had a more sophisticated use case and we needed to use nunjucks for some reason into here. This is not legal nunjucks anymore, but that's kind of HTML-like, and so that's going to be an H1. Let's do that. And we have an about, and that's going to be inside of a paragraph tag. And we can save this, and we'll get, in this particular case, identical output. We haven't done much yet with the ways in which Eleventy allows you to inject data into sites or manipulate them or template them. But the message here is that whatever the content is transparent to how we're actually building that site output at the end. But this isn't a super fleshed out site. Let's start to add some consistency to this. Let's start to actually build a site from here. And one of the things that we'll want is some sort of way to lay out this content across multiple sites. And so I want to take you to here, the docs that we have, that Eleventy has, and look at how layouts work. Core to the concept, Eleventy is kind of built on top of the shoulders of static site generators like Jekyll, and a lot of the time each of those markdown files would have some front matter to them. That's separated by 3 dashes, and then it's YAML inside of here. You can change out in the config how you want to specify that, but that's kind of our standard. And so anytime we have a layout, we can reference that this file should leverage a particular layout by using this layout tag. That's an important name. And then putting in some layout into here. There are some important folder names that you can extend as part of the configuration, but let's start with at least what we have here. So if we use the directory _includes, and I'll close this, and I will add an _includes, and we're gonna create a new file in here and call it default layout.njk. And here's where I want some templating language to help start making some of these broader concerns in building a website. We don't need that for the content as much. Content is going to get injected into those templating layers, but here we'll want something. This will be a regular website. So let's just take some snippet and kind of start off with this and move forward from there. When Eleventy processes content from a particular file and inherits it into the layout, that is available as a property on here called content. And we could save this. Right now we haven't associated that layout yet, but that will inject the content into this site. One additional step that we need is, in this case, the content that we're producing is HTML, right? So think of all of this is going to get wrapped up into the content property. And when we want to put that into here, since it's HTML, we have to let it know that it doesn't need to escape it. By default, it will. And so we'll pass that into a filter, and it will say, hey, let's mark this as safe and actually inject that. Only do that if you can trust the content, if you're writing it or something like that. So make sure you have locked down what your content pipeline is, or that when you're handling, you can override the default markdown renderer. And so if you have comments and you wanted to include, from some site configuration down the road, and you wanted to strip out most types of comments that could include script tags and stuff, you say we only want some bold or some italics or links, and that's all you get commented. You can certainly do that in custom markdown renderers. Okay, so now we have the bare bones of a layout. It's not super sophisticated yet. We're going to inject whatever content we have, and we're going to mark that content as safe. All we need to do to our existing 3 types of content is mark that this is the layout that we want to use. And so in this case, we'll create our little front matter block. We'll put layout, and we can include default layout.njk. It does not need the folder in there. It's going to look for something with this name inside of the includes folder, wherever that is. Let's take this and also apply it to here, and also apply it to here, and run the site again. And it might actually not look that much different. Let's make sure it looks a little bit different because this isn't really providing that much name. Let's say that this is let's have an H1 here for JS Marathon 11. Great. Now we'll actually kind of be able to see whether this made it into here. This is automatically loading in the background. I can probably shrink that a little bit. And let's refresh that. And we have JS Marathon 11D. If we inspect this document, we will see we'll see some stuff related to browser sync. Don't worry about that unless you're doing some kind of performance audit, and then you can do from dev. It's not going to matter for most things that you'll want during the dev lifecycle. But we have all the stuff that we included as part of our HTML template, and we have all the content injected into here. That's great. Let's flesh this out a little bit more and make this look a little bit nicer, maybe. And so, one thing that I want to do onto here is maybe include some styling onto this. We want to include styling as part of the default layout somewhere. So I'd like to link to some style sheet that will do that. Let's come up with some styles together. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but let's take a look. Let's say that on body, let me increase the size of this as well. Okay, here's JS Marathon, and I'm just kind of come up with some rudimentary styles together. We have a body. Let's say that the max width of that is 40 rem, and we're also gonna margin auto 0. Should kind of center that. Let's see. Max width, margin auto 0. Let's take a look at body. Is it 0 auto? Maybe we haven't hit max width yet. Oh, and we haven't hit min width. Margin auto 0. Let's call it width of 40 rem. This is supposed to be some centering hack. Let's start with this. That looks a little bit better. Let's just say that at its core, these are not good styles. But let's say we want to inject them somewhere into the pipeline, and we can tweak them later as designers come in and help us out with this. Kyle Dye asks a question: if you don't define content in your template, is it automatically appended? No. Asking because if we don't define a layout, it just outputs content. That's correct. Yeah, I mean, we can showcase what would happen if we don't do this and we say, hey, use this layout. And each one of these, it's just going to use the layout. And that's because, in fairness, there's not one place where that content should go, right? We might have something you see often is, maybe there's div main, and that's where we want the content to live inside of here. So there's not one place in this layout that the content definitely has to live. And so it's worth allowing you to define that. And the way content is one property that we get from here that reflects all of the content that's inside of here, we'll also be able to put lots of properties into here that will be able to template out on a site that has a lot more information. Great question though. So let's solve this one additional problem of, I want some way of being able to apply some CSS here. One solution, and I'll just throw it out there, right, is I could take this body here and put it into a default layout, and that would apply universally to all of the content that we're producing. But let's assume that as this grows, that's not going to be a sufficient solution. What we really want to do is be able to author style sheets externally and then pull them into the site somehow. And so we can get rid of that block. And what we'll want to do is create an entire folder, pretty common pattern anyway. Let's just call it assets. And we're going to put all of the assets that we might want for the site in here. You could subfolder this right into images, scripts, styles, something like that, as your the complexity of your architecture grows. But let's just put this immediately into here. And saw a recent Twitter discussion recently. What do you call this? Do you call it style.css or site.css, or like, what do you call the main thing? If there are opinions, leave them in the comments. Site.css, they're both architecturally the same, no biggie. Site.css will work, and ideally, what we want to be able to do from here is have a style sheet tag, and we want to be able to reference that. Something like this, I'd kind of expect that to work. But if we save this whole thing, we should be able to guess that it's not going to work. And the reason we can guess that is because part of our output didn't include, this is everything that we're hosting about the site comes from site. And assets never made its way into the site output directory. And that's because we need to tell Eleventy about it specifically. We need to say, hey, this is content that this isn't it's not content, right? Eleventy only automatically handles anything that's it describes as content, a nunjux file, markdown file, any of the other content templating languages that we looked at. For everything else, we're going to have to start maintaining a relatively small Eleventy configuration file. And so if we go into, let's go out of this and come into here. We should be able to go to configuration. And one of the configuration points on here is pass-through file copy. The file name for configuration, is there a, nice. The way you extend Eleventy, pretty much the only point that we're going to say, hey, here's all the central configuration, is through adding a file that's eleventy.js to the root directory. So let's do that and add .eleventy.js, and it gives us our extension point into all things Eleventy. From there, we can add filters. The return of this function is going to look a little something like this. The return can specify additional configurations, but mostly most of the APIs are to take this config object and modify the way that everything is configured in some shape or form. And so what we want to do, gonna steal this syntax, as you should. We can get rid of all of this. And let's add pass-through file copy. How we do that, pass-through file copy, is not on template formats. Here we go. So if there was, for example, an image folder, this line would add that to the output directory site.image. And so we will take that as our first extension point and add on assets into here. As soon as we build that, sometimes this is a problem. I think sometimes it happens on Windows more than it happens on Linux, I've seen for some reason, or Linux or Mac. But if we modify something inside of the Eleventy config, sometimes we have to close down this watcher and let it reboot from the beginning. So I'll close out of this. We should be able to serve this again. And as soon as we did that, let's look at the site output of this too. Does it say anything about pass-through copy? It copied one file. So it wrote these three files. And the copied one file is everything that it found inside of here. It copied this one file. We could have more directories involved in that. We could have more files within those directories. At this level, anything subdirectory is just going to take this whole thing and dump it into here. But that's exactly what we wanted. If we go now, that didn't do much. If we go now to our site and refresh this, did we take out the actual content in there? Just for that example, let's look at default layout. I think content is misspelled. And because this is JavaScript based, if we say, hey, inject this undefined value, there's going to be nothing that barks at that particular thing. A lot of the times, and I think especially when we're talking about static site generation, failures during the build step is actually a feature, not a bug. I'd rather know about it now. And there are plenty of things that will produce error states, like if we were accessing a property off this or something. But that itself didn't cause an issue. I think when we save this, we'll be able to see here's our content getting injected onto the site. Let's, onto here, now create on our layout site some way to just navigate between these three sites, because that's what one other thing we'll want to do. If you're familiar with the work that you do on, this is the way the web has always worked, way back when, and there's almost in static site generation a call back to the simplicity of building a website without JavaScript as the central tenant that it runs on top of. But if you're familiar with React Router, how Angular handles routing or Vue handles routing, all we're going to do on here is let's create a nav maybe, and a list inside of there. And each one of those is going to get anchors. And we're just going to say this is home. And let's copy that. And we're going to have one for about. Most of the time, Netlify or your hosting service might go redirect you from here. It doesn't actually exist anywhere. There's a folder called about, but because we want to host the index.html in there, it might be able to find this content as long as about.html doesn't exist inside of here, but only after a redirect. So make sure that you append this. You don't need the index.html in there, but you do need the closing bracket just for what the path that you're actually hitting. So we have an about, and we have a contact. Let's put this here. Let's add contact, about, and then we'll save this default layout and take a look at it on here. Okay. Sweet. So I should be able to go home. I should be able to go about. I should be able to go contact. And there, add some navigation. And let's take a little bit of time to just clean that up as well. Make it reasonable. Okay, so on here, let's take a look at this nav and UL. Say anything under the nav UL. We will take list style none. We'll say that's display flex. Then maybe get rid of padding on the left. If you work with lists a lot and they're very good for accessibility, you're kind of familiar with a lot of these original things to get rid of some of the list styling. And let's take that one more and say for any LIs under there, I'm going to give them a little bit of padding. Then they'll look a little bit more reasonable. I know this isn't a CSS talk, but sometimes can't help myself to just make things look a little bit more reasonable. Let's align everything center. Awesome. And grab all those styles. That looks a little bit better. So we're going to add the styles to here. We're well on our way. Let's talk about another issue on here. So one thing is this still just says document. All we have on this default layout is a title of document. Ideally, what I'd like to title each one of these individual documents here is I'd like to title this one home. I'd like to title this about. I'd like to title this contact. And there's in the way that you define your front matter, this is entirely flexible to whatever properties that you want to define as part of that content. It doesn't even have to be uniform across all pieces of content. It just means I'm going to inject this property and make it available at the templating layer. And so we can define a property called title and call that hello JS Marathon. For often it is the case that I don't want to repeat these things twice inside of the same document. So I'm actually just going to remove it from here. And so I'll get rid of it from there, and I'll just lean on it being defined within the title, and then we'll put it back in within the default layout. Let's do that all the way through and through. So let's add title property or contact. That's just going to be contact. Let's add a title property to our about. And even though the syntax highlighting isn't agreeing with us, putting front matter into nunjucks, it's still perfectly legal. And I think there are some extensions that help better than others. But for whatever reason, it's not highlighting it this way. That's okay. It will still get processed identically. Let's save all those. Now, we're not leveraging that title property anywhere. So for now, we've lost information as part of this refactor. But let's take advantage of it inside of here. Just like content is, what we're doing is injecting content by surrounding it with double curly braces, and that's all nunjucks, right? This is a nunjucks file. What nunjucks is good at is having a templating language. You throw data into it, and then it combines them into the output. Eleventy is handing that handoff, but if you're looking for, hey, how is this getting formatted? We have the nunjucks docs, and those will give you a bigger sense of, hey, here's how I interpolate variables. Here's how I filter them if we need to filter anything. Okay, so let's look at this. And we know now that all of our documents are passing us a title property. And so I'm going to put title inside of here. And also, we used to have that defined as part of the page. And so we have an H1 here inside of content right here. I'm going to define H2, and I'm going to say, hey, here's the title that we're getting also, and then have the rest of it inside of content after that. So let's save that and hop back to our site. Did we have contact defined twice? Or maybe in this particular one, I didn't take it out of here as well. Okay. Awesome. So we have a 3-page site now. We have home, we have about, we have contact. We can move between them. And importantly, we can style all of them within one uniform template that gives us some templating features as well, and injects all of that into there. What else do we want to do next? Man, I love it when I'm able to commit something and push that up to Netlify and showcase what the build steps look like. But let's take a look at this. I do see a Git in here. I do see a hub create. I am gonna spend a second debugging this. So we have this. That is the origin that I want to point to. Inside of here, we should be able to git config edit, and that looks exactly the same. Okay, so why can't we push up anything? We haven't really committed anything. I don't recall doing that. So let's, don't save. Let's check what the git status is. Untracked files. And I think we can git add all of them. Okay, and git commit. Let me make this visible for everyone. Git commit, and we'll throw in a message of a init commit. Okay, this is starting to feel better. Pressure will fail just because it wants me to set all those things. We can paste that in. Okay, this looks great. It seems like the source control part of Visual Studio was just not firing. We can work with this. Okay, so if we toggle back to here, we should see all this code, some of the setup work that we've paid already in terms of getting node modules and ignoring the site. There's no part of this that includes our site build at this point in time. We just have the raw source code that we need to process and build that site. If you're not familiar with Netlify, it does wonders for static site generation. And that's, I think they've kind of coined the term Jamstack. I think that's been their baby. I don't know if I have the correct attribution there, but they certainly run JamConf and stuff like that. They're a big part in that ecosystem. And so if you head over to a Netlify, this is all done under free tier stuff. There's a new site from Git option. We're going to do that. If you've never done this before, when you click GitHub, you'll have a little bit to do to set that up and connect it to your account. And from here, you can sort through whatever repositories you have and click this. One thing you'll notice is that Netlify has their own detection system, and so if it notices that something looks like an Eleventy site from your source code, then it will fill in the defaults for that Eleventy site. So the build command that we want is just to run Eleventy, and the publish directory is site. And so those are the two pieces of configuration on an Eleventy site, and they'll just automatically detect that, and we'll hit deploy. That site deploy is in progress. We can watch all the build steps there as it's going through each of those build steps. There's nothing, maybe we shouldn't, there's nothing that inherently interesting about what's going on here until you have to go in and debug something. But they're going to get node set up. They're going to install all the stuff. They're going to run that build command. And it should be done already. So we should have that preview here. And this is our site running. And the first thing I do on every Eleventy site is make this a little bit prettier of a URL. So let's go back into site settings on here, and we can change site name. And this just has to be unique to Netlify. Most of the time I find that it's most names are available just because it's such a smaller subdomain of allowable names that you'd need to not have conflicts against. But let's check if that one isn't. If it ever has any problems, we can deploy it off there. So this is our site running on Netlify at JS Marathon 11d.netlify. Do we know if I can comment on the YouTube stream? No, I can't. Sarah, you can feel free to add that comment if you have the ability to on the stream, or people can take that down. Either way. So that is live now. If you're not familiar with Netlify or CI/CD or what that's kind of doing for your pipeline, let's kind of just say, let's include one more thing. It's going to be Kyle M at this dot. We'll include a mail to, and that'll be the same thing, Kyle M at this dot. And we'll save that. Source control still isn't configured here. So we'll git add everything. We'll git commit with add email, and we'll git push. And that should put our website on. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. That should push up our website onto here. We should have now 2 commits. If we go over to our build steps and look at deploys, we should have 2 deploys. It deployed in 16 seconds, and it looks like it is already live. Nope. At this address. And if we go to contact, that should be there and updated. Okay. I'm looking for any other questions we might have in chat about other things that we can look at inside of here. But that's the bare bones of Eleventy, how to get started with it, what that kind of processing power is. That's really only taking you through the most immediate first couple of use cases that you'll encounter. I'm going to post the link in chat. If people want to get there. But let me just kind of at least illustrate or talk about some of the more advanced use cases and how you might accomplish them or where Eleventy sits in those configurations as well. One thing that you can do is there's a data folder that by convention, I believe, is underscore data. And we'll be able to put whatever data we want in here. And let's just say it is JSON. Yeah. So is everything? So Kyle asks a question. So is everything under the 3 dashed lines mapped to the content variable? Good question. So let's take a look at this. So what this section is referring to is the front matter. And this is a YAML configuration to store that data. It is not mapped to content, but all essentially, if this had to be reflected in front matter and the entire site was front matter, it would be as if right now, with as little as is in this site, it would look like that in front matter. Is that there are 3 properties being exposed by this site when we move it to a layout engine. 3 properties exposed by this content when we move it to a layout engine. One is the layout that it's in, and that's just kind of how Eleventy is playing traffic cop. So there are 2 usable properties that we might have. Eleventy injects a whole bunch of other properties that are available: the file path, the slug, the permalink, the URL. That content is anticipated to be built into that you might want to include inside of that as well. But the ones that you have control over are title and content. Content, in effect, is just everything after these 3 permalinks are just content. And then whatever, if we had author in here, and that was going to be Kyle, you don't even need to specify that property across all pages. So let's say contact has an author, index doesn't. But we want to include it somewhere in our layout. We could put in the footer, maybe, authored by, not Kyle, author. Let's go run this as well. 11D serve. We'll run that locally. And I'll get to kind of the edge case that we're hitting in a second. Under contact, we have authored by Kyle. On all these other pages, we just have an authored by blank. And so one thing you might want to do as we're templating out this page is only include this particular footer if you have that piece of data, if you're only going to include it on some pages and not others. For that, we can go look at the docs for nunjucks, and there's an if statement that we can run. And nunjucks is also based on JavaScript, so it behaves a lot of the same ways that JavaScript behaves, which is to say that this variable, with all of the same weirdness that JavaScript brings to the table in terms of truthiness or falsiness, this will say if this variable is truthy, then we're going to include whatever in this block. Otherwise, we're not. Let me zoom that in a little. There's some if, elif blocks. There's some if or else blocks that you can use. But let's take this block. This is half answering the question, I think, already, but also just being able to showcase which things are around inside of this system. So here, this is for injecting the value, but the actual value is held inside of author. So here we wouldn't do author like that. We're not injecting it into this expression. We're just including it. And outside of caps. Hi. We can include author, and let's save that and jump back to here. And so author is removed from here and removed from here, and available on contact. So we can do that there. But hopefully that gets to the question of, hey, what's going on inside of here? These are all properties. Anything that's valid YAML will sit fine in here. So you can include a date that's an actual type date. You can include arrays of things if you had, if you're going to do this for blogging or something, you can have tags in here for, one of my tags is JS Marathon. Another one might be hello. Another one might be JavaScript, something like that. And then that array is made available. If we want to talk about, and I kind of briefly started going down this road, so sorry for jumping ship and pivoting quickly, everyone. If we want to talk about one clarification or misnomer that I think exists within static site generation is that they're for static sites. And that's just the delivery system of a static site is over precompiled files. The degree to which it is static just really has to do with the degree to which you run builds on something. Static site hosting is pretty cheap. Builds are traditionally pretty cheap. So there are integrations with Netlify and Zapier that you can just say, hey, run this build every 5 minutes or run this build every day and get new information onto there. And the build is absolutely welcome to include API calls as well. So if you have some data you want to put in somewhere, and I'm going to list the name of all of my cats here. We have Frida, and we have Ginger, and we have, and JSON has a very specific format that it likes seeing. That's fine. And we have Gus. If we have those cats on here, we can have data available to us. Anything in this global data directory is available during the template generation. So there are a couple different patterns for how to address data in Eleventy. One that I like to personally do is if there's data that I care about, have a pre-build step that goes and fetches that data and puts it in the data directory. And then during the build step, goes and takes advantage of whatever is in here. So pretend we had some call that kind of hit an API to go grab this information. The reason I like that pattern is, oh, hi, Ape, can I ask a question? Yeah, absolutely. Go for it. The reason I like that pattern is because when you're running over a local dev environment, I don't like hitting that API every time I want to spin up something for the same exact set of data. So every time I'm running a build, I don't want that necessarily to have to go hit an API. You might hit cap limits. You might just increase your build times. I'd rather that data is available. And so imagine you have a pre-build step that goes and hydrates all of that information. If here we want to add in all of those cats, we should have the ability to have that information. Here, the naming of stuff is important. So the convention is whatever you have named this property is now available. And just in the sake of time, there's a nunjux kind of debug operator called dump, and that will just put stuff in there. Maybe we wanted to loop through these properties. Maybe we wanted to build out some lists. Maybe that data had images on it that we were going to build into there. But let's just see if we get that data and see if we can dump it into here. Okay, and so here's that data, presumably maybe brought in over API, and now available to us at the point in time that we're templating it. And the combination of that, although not entirely spelled out here is a powerful metric for combining data and content and pooling them together and building a static site. So there's a lot of powerful stuff that you can do in here, hopefully with as little code as it takes to get the job done. That's kind of the goal of building stuff. So I think that puts us at exactly an hour. If any questions come in, I can kind of pull for a couple more minutes and take a look at them. And if you have any more questions after the show, you can catch me on Twitter. You can contact us at this.co and let me know what other things you want to see on Eleventy or what other questions you're running into. Certainly any other advanced topics we could cover as well at a later point in time. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kyle. That was awesome. If you have any further questions, let Kyle know on Twitter. We are back at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. TypeScript for Beginners is next with Daisy Nolan, so don't miss it. Again, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see y'all soon.
Thanks, everyone.